Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be answering the question, does a comma separate a verb and its object? As you should already know, a comma separates words, clauses or ideas within a sentence. But I think it's important to revisit for you a specific type of verb that's worth considering when answering this question. It's called a transitive verb, and it's a verb or a doing word that takes an object. Let's take, for example, I avoided the car. Avoided is the transitive verb. Because I can't just say I avoided, it doesn't make sense. I need the object of the car for the sentence to make sense. So it makes sense for us to realise that the rule for commas separating a verb and its object is remarkably simple. We should never separate a transitive verb from its direct object, that's the object in a sentence, with a comma. Why? Because we're splitting up what makes sense to go in one clause or one focus for the sentence. That means that without it, it wouldn't make sense. Let me give you an example that is incorrect. This person has said, I'm glad I trained, Nellie not to beg for sugar cubes. Now, this is wrong for one simple reason. The fact that the speaker trained Nellie not to beg for sugar cubes shouldn't be split with a comma after the verb trained. There are actually two transitive verbs in this sentence. The fact that the speaker trained Nellie and the fact that they trained Nellie not to beg for sugar cubes. So you could argue there are two objects in the sentence. There's Nellie and there's the sugar cubes. Now I'd say the most obvious significant object in the sentence is Nellie, but we're also considering the sugar cubes. So we should never split apart the detail between what the verb is saying and what the object is saying. Because if we put a comma in between that information, it confuses the reader and it makes it unclear what the logic of our sentence was. For each of the examples as they emerge, I want you to identify if the sentence is grammatically accurate. Remember that we should never separate the object from the verb with a comma, because that confuses the reader. Hit pause if you need thinking time. So sentence number 1 had this. Adam said, he likes chocolate. What did you find with that sentence? It seems strange to me that Adam said something and then we separated the fact that he said something, the verb said, from the object, which is that he likes chocolate. In this case, chocolate is the object that we're considering, as is the verb likes actually. The initial verb is said, though. When we separate what the phrase was, Adam said, from what he said, we're confusing the reader. It should instead say, Adam said he likes chocolate. That is correct. With example number 2, she was delighted to see Olafemi had won. It is perfectly accurate without adding a comma. It would be complicated to decide where we would place a comma in this sentence because we would be splitting up in part of a transitive verb or part of an object. So the subject of the sentence is she. She was delighted, that's a verb that's transitive, to see Olafemi, who's an object in this sentence, and that he had won. If we put a comma anywhere, it would confuse us about the clause within the sentence. We do not need a comma because it makes perfect and accurate sense without a comma. Finally, the nurse, took off his spectacles. This is grammatically incorrect too, but for a slightly different reason. Here, the subject of our sentence has been separated from the object and the verb. It's important for you to realise that in an ideal world, we do not separate the subject, object or verb from each other in a simple sentence. So whilst the nurse is actually the subject, we know that the verb is that they took off their spectacles. And it makes best sense for these items to not be separated with a comma. Now it's your turn. For each of the 5 sentences that come up, I want you to identify if it is accurate or not. Think carefully about the use of the comma and if it is splitting up the object and the verb. Hit pause if you need thinking time. So, how did you get on? I damaged the fence. Oh dear. It's grammatically accurate though. The transitive verb damaged is in the same part of the sentence, not separated from the object that has been damaged, which is the fence, unfortunately. Number 2. Fatima completed, all her homework. Well done, Fatima, but unfortunately, the use of the comma, splitting the subject and the verb from our object, the homework, is incorrect. We should never split a transitive verb from its object. And here we go, this next sentence sounds quite aggressive. I demand that you, behave like a man, not a beast. In this sentence, you do not need a comma. The comma is not really helping add clarity. The first transitive verb in this sentence is demanding. I demand, when somebody demands, you want to know what they demand. I demand that you behave, that's another transitive verb, like a man, not a beast. Oh dear. We should not need a comma. Remove it. Let's look at the 4th example. Callum enjoyed the game. Callum is both the subject and his enjoyment of the game, which is the object, and the verb enjoyed is all together. It's a beautiful, simple sentence. It's a yes. It's correct. And finally, Eduardo risked, losing his money. Oh dear. So Eduardo is the subject. The verb that's transitive is risked, and the verb losing is important here as well. We've split the 2 verbs up, and that's a struggle in this sentence. Eduardo risked losing his money. That should be all together for us to understand this. So instead, it is incorrect. We should never split the verb from the object. Now this seems technical, but just remember this simple rule. We never split the subject from the verb, as we considered in video 11.1, and we never split the object from the verb. If you keep that at the centre of your mind, this whole business of using commas becomes incredibly simple. Best of luck with that. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?